What's up, everybody? Let's talk about gearing in ICC as a Shadow Priest. Now, even though there's been no official word on the release date of the tier, we're hoping it'll be around the end of September, beginning of October, and it's never too early to talk about loot because the loot this tier is extremely spicy. Now, if you do enjoy this content, please consider giving me a like and subscribe, as a lot of my viewers are not actually subscribed, and I would really appreciate it if you were. Without further ado, let's get into it. But before we actually talk about the gear, I want to talk about how we get tier this phase, because unfortunately it's different than how we got tier 9, which was different than how we got tier 8. So there are 3 item levels of tier to start with: 251, 264, and 277. Now you have to use badges to buy the first tier at 251. From there, you can upgrade, but you just need tokens from the raid. You no longer need badges. So to upgrade from 251 to 264 requires a token that you get from 10-man heroic or 25-man normal mode in ICC. Now to go from 264 to 277, you have to get a token that drops from 25-man heroic ICC. You cannot, unfortunately, go from 251 to 277. You have to do the intermediate step at 264. Now, if you're lucky enough, you might be able to get some of these tokens, or some of these tier pieces rather, from Vault of Archivon, because there I believe you can get the pants or the gloves at 251 item level in 10-man or 264 in 25-man. So that'll help your gearing a lot. You'll be able to get your tier a lot faster because the tier pieces are pretty expensive. It'll probably take 3 to 4 weeks to get your 4-piece, depending on which pieces you're going for. And you're gonna be wanting to get it fast because the tier 10 bonus for Shadow Priest is awesome. Not the 2-piece so much, but the 4-piece is incredibly strong. Now that's actually something that I want to talk about because of how strong the 4-piece is, it actually lends itself to give us a different talent setup than what we're used to. So I'm going to go over to the talent setup here, and you can see this is the standard Shadow Priest setup that we've used for pretty much this entire expansion. Now, when I click on this tier 10 button, you're going to see that the talents change a bit. We lose 5 points in Improved Mind Blast, we lose Dispersion, and we lose 5 points in Twisted Faith and 2 in Pain and Suffering. Now we're putting all of those into the disc tree, so we're reducing the mana cost of our instant cast spells, which doesn't really matter. We're increasing our total intellect by 15%, which is fine. It gives us some crit, but it doesn't really matter. What we are doing that does matter is increasing our damage by 4% and then increasing our spirit and haste by 4%. So when I sim this, and this sim that I have right here, it was done using the standard talent setup, you can see I'm getting 230, 240 DPS on a 2.5 minute fight. So this setting is with 150 second duration, and you can see that this is simming pretty well. Now there are 2 major downsides to this. One is not having Dispersion. So on any fight where you're taking a lot of damage and you want to be able to use Dispersion to be safe, it might be better to use the standard talent setup if that's something that's going to help you live when you otherwise wouldn't. And then number 2 is the fact that we have only 1 out of 3 points in Pain and Suffering. This means that our Mind Flay only has a 33% chance to refresh our Shadow Word Pain. Now, our Mind Flay does cast faster with the tier 10 4-piece, so those 2 balance out slightly, so we have more opportunities to refresh in that same window. But if you're multi-dotting, then this is going to be a really big pain in order to maintain your Shadow Word Pain on multiple targets. Now, I haven't done ICC in about 15 years, so it's really hard for me to remember what fights were good for multi-dotting and which ones weren't. But after PTR testing comes out, if there are a lot of fights with multi-dotting, it might just make more sense to use the standard talent setup in order to have a 100% chance to refresh. But obviously that's something that we won't know until the raid is actually here. But I did want to put that out there because of this. This talent setup does sim really well and is probably what top parsing Shadow Priest will be using next phase. Now, one other thing that I want to say about why this is so strong is because Twisted Faith, what this does is it makes 20% of our spirit turn into spell power. But a lot of the gear in this next phase doesn't actually have spirit on it. Just doing a quick scan of the items, this is crit haste spell power, crit haste spell power. You can see there's a lot of crit haste spell power or crit hit spell power or haste hit spell power. There's not a whole lot of spirit this phase, which means that this talent Twisted Faith loses a lot of value anyway. So it does make sense to go in here because we're not getting as much value from spirit as we were before with our gear. Now let's talk about the actual gear. So I mentioned we have our 4-piece tier, and those are going to be on the head, shoulders, chest, and gloves. Now, there is another set that I'll talk about in a little bit where we swap the glove set with the pants, but these two sets are our BIS simming sets, and the other set is really only applicable if you're Alliance. So the other item that pretty much everybody's going to have is the Ashen Band of Endless Destruction. So this is the same thing as the Mount Hygel ring or the Karazhan ring. It is a rep ring that gets increasingly stronger as you get more rep with the Ashen Verdict, which you increase your rep by killing enemies in Icecrown Citadel. Now, eventually when you get exalted, you get a nice proc onto it similar to the Hygel ring. But this has hit, haste, and spell power, so it's going to be a nice source of hit for every single caster, which means since this has hit, it's one less reason to take hit on gear. Now, throughout this entire set, the only items that aren't tier that have hit on them outside of this ring are the Plaguebringer Stained Pants is hit, haste, spell power, and then the Lady's Brittle Bracers crit, hit, spell power. Every single other item is haste, crit, and spell power. So these stats are optimal for us because Spirit just really wasn't that good to begin with. Now, I mentioned that this is the BIS Horde setup, and this is at 18% hit because I'm currently in my Alliance setup. So obviously if you're a troll, you'd sim higher than this. I just have 1% extra hit from being Alliance. Now, if I select this alternative set, the only thing that changes is that the tier pants, or the pants now become tier pants, and we're using the Gunship Captain's Mittens. So again, I simmed this using the previous set that I showed. And now when I sim this set, it's basically right around the same. I've simmed this and it's been below. The other set I've simmed it and it's been higher. So they're pretty much right in the same ballpark. But now my hit is 17.8%, or if you were a troll, this would be 16.8%. So if you're Horde, I wouldn't recommend this set necessarily because you'll be 0.2% under the hit cap. But if Plaguebringer Stained Pants end up being really contested and the Gunship's Captain Mittens aren't, this could be a good alternative for anybody who doesn't mind, using a Veiled Gem if you're Horde, or just for any Alliance player. Now, because of the way items are statted, there really isn't another set that you want. Talking about a BIS 25-man heroic setup. Every item is pretty much set in stone outside of the pants and the gloves, just because everything is optimally statted and there aren't a ton of options at 277 item level. So most items have one or two other pieces, and a lot of times it's like crit spirit spell power. Obviously you don't want that, or like a crit hit spell power. And if we don't need hit, then that option's kind of bad. So it's really hard to find different sets like we could with TOGC because TOGC had a lot more options of items at 258 item level. Now, the other thing to talk about is trinkets. These two trinkets are incredibly strong and are going to be wanted by every single caster. Now, if you had to prioritize one of them, that would be Phylactery of the Nameless Lich. This thing is so strong. It's a juiced up flare that not only has more critical strike rating on the normal equip bonus, but if you read the proc description, it says each time one of your spells deals periodic damage, you have a chance to gain 1207 spell power for 20 seconds. So not only is the proc stronger than the amount of spell power we get from flare, it procs off of periodic damage at a 30% chance. So if that tooltip is right, this thing is going to proc on cooldown almost immediately for every single Shadow Priest because you're going to have 3 dots ticking on single target and a lot more on multi-target, which means, have you ever been in a fight and your flare just didn't proc during Lust? Or you had like 30, 40 seconds left in a fight and it just didn't proc at all during that time, even though it was off cooldown? Yeah, happened to me too. So hopefully that should never happen with this trinket. It's going to be incredibly strong and is a lot stronger than Dislodge for an object, though this is still incredible. Now, the thing to say about all of this gear is if you're not a heroic raider, you basically want all the same items, just at 264 item level instead of 277. So 264 is what you get out of normal 25-man and heroic 10-man, but if you're not doing heroic 25-man, I don't know if you're going to be doing heroic 10-man. Obviously, no idea how hard the 10-mans are going to be. If you're just doing normal, then you basically want all the same gear. The only difference is that you are going to be lacking a little bit of hit. So what I'd recommend then is replacing the Ring of Rapid Ascent with Valinar's other signet ring. So essentially you're going from crit haste spell power to a hit haste spell power ring. That's the only difference. Every other item is the same, including the trinkets at 264 item level. Even at 264 item level, these are both better than Reign of the Dead and Flare of the Heavens at their respective item levels. So That's the gear and the 2 different sets that we have. Now the other thing to talk about are weapons. So the Lich King drops weapons at 7 item levels higher than every other boss. So you're going to want to get your weapon from the Lich King weapons. Now, as you can see, we have the one-handed mace here and an offhand. The staff is pretty bad, and unfortunately, how I was talking about we don't want spirit, is statted with having spirit, haste, and spell power. So it makes it kind of unfortunate if you want to use it. It's not bad, but you do lose about 200 DPS, I believe, by using that instead of a one hand and an offhand. So you definitely want to go for the one hand and the offhand if you can. So this should just be between you, your Boomkin, your Ellie Shaman, and best player gets it. I can't tell you which one it's better for. I think sims are going to be changing over the next month or two, and even after the raid releases. So it's really hard to say who deserves which item. And now the only other thing to talk about is 10-man. Now, unfortunately, if you are a 10-man gamer only, you are going to still have a mix of Ulduar and TOGC loot in your BIS list. This is because 10-man ICC drops loot at 251 item level, and heroic is 264 with weapons from Lich King being 271. So even at that 264 item level, you're still gonna want a flare as your trinket, for example. There is Muradin's Spyglass, which is a really strong trinket. It's essentially illustration of the Dragon Soul with 152 crit rating on it. But there's not really another good trinket outside of that. So your BIS setup would have this and flare as your 2 trinkets. So I'm not really gonna talk about 10-man gear here. I can try to put together a 10-man BIS list if you're interested. Okay, so we talked about all the loot in the phase. Final thing to talk about is what do we want to prioritize when the phase comes out? So the first thing, the most important thing is getting your 4-piece tier bonus. Now, you can't really prioritize tier because you just need your badges to buy it. You can't actually, like the tokens don't allow you to buy tier if you don't have it. It only allows you to upgrade your pieces. So you're not actually going to be prioritizing tier, but you as a person should make sure that you're doing your daily heroic every day. You're doing your Vaults of Archivon every week. You are doing everything you can to get as many badges and as many opportunities for this tier as possible. So that's number 1, and doesn't affect loot prio, but it's just something to make sure that you know. Secondly, the most important item to get is Phylactery of the Nameless Lich. This is the single strongest item as a singular upgrade next phase. I'm gonna go back to this is my current gear on live right now, and I just wanna sim myself, and then I'm gonna replace Rain because Rain's a little bit worse than Flare with this trinket. So Phylactery, if I could spell. And you can see it's about 500 DPS upgrade over, so 460. So it is incredibly strong. But the thing is, it's incredibly contested too. Every single caster is going to want this item. Now, if I put Dislodge for an object in here, it's still really good. It's just not quite as good as Phylactery. So this is a 300 DPS upgrade. And over Flare, it's probably closer to a 200 to 250 DPS upgrade. So you definitely want to prioritize Phylactery because this is not only incredibly strong, but it's also going to be incredibly contested. Now, going back to my current gear, the next item that you want to prioritize is going to be the one-hander. So the Royal Scepter of Tyrannus II. So this is also going to be about a 500 DPS upgrade over current gear. Now, this is not as contested, similar to the mace of this phase, if that's what you went for. This is going to be wanted by your boomies, by your elemental shamans. Some healers might want it, but they have Valinir, so screw them. You should get this over them. If any healer is getting this item over you, you should find a new guild. But when it comes to you versus your Ellie Shaman or your Boomkin in your raid, hopefully it goes to the better player, and hopefully that's you. So after you prioritize Phylactery and the weapon, your third item can be a little bit of a choose your own adventure. I think the single strongest standalone item would probably be Dislodge for an object, but that's still going to be really contested. And if it's third on your list, that might be the same as it being 5th on your list, just depending if everybody's putting it at number 1 or if your other casters are putting it at number 1. So this is kind of going to be where you need to evaluate your own guild and your own needs depending on your gear. Like if you don't have a flare, obviously the upgrade to Dislodge for an object is going to be a lot stronger than if you do. So if you really need hit, you could take a look at which set you're going to be using, whether it's going to be using tier pants or it's going to be using tier gloves, and you could look at the off piece and see how contested that's going to be. I would basically try to choose the least contested off piece because that piece is gonna be pretty minor compared to getting other upgrades faster. So if you can choose the less contested off piece, and even if you're Horde, you can go with this set, you'll just have to use a Veiled gem, which is not ideal. You'll probably be losing about 20 DPS, but 20 DPS when we're talking about 16K is really, really meaningless. So it's something to think about, where what do you want to prioritize depending on your own gear? And this is where I think the common phrase sim it really comes into play. So I would highly recommend you take some time to sim your gear, see what's the best for you and see what's the least contested. Try to see if you can organize with the other casters in your guild. I would highly recommend just trying to make sure that you guys can find a balance of what gear you want and what gear they want, and try not to overlap too much. Now that might be easier said than done. I don't know what your loot situation is like, but hopefully it's a friendly environment where everybody gets gear, which again, I know is not always the case. Anyway, that's all for this video. If there's anything you think I didn't cover, let me know and I'll make another video on it, or I'll make some additions. I will do whatever it takes to make sure that this is as accurate as it can be. Anyway, that's all for this video. My name's Man BIS, and I'll see you in the next one.